Part 3 of our series, we're now going to look at who are we. We've looked at who is He, who is God. As we represent Him in part 2, who am I, we must represent Him out of a true picture of who God is. How do we align ourselves with that image of who He is? How do we see Him for who He really is and then live that out as His representation? But now as Jesus followers, we must understand that we're not called to be individuals. We're called to be part of a body, called to be part of a community. And that community, that communal identity is essential for us as we follow Jesus, as we wrestle with who we are. Paul, the Apostle Paul, in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10, he writes something that can often get missed. He's helping them understand who they are after the death and resurrection and victory of Jesus. He says, now as a result of this, the church will be the revealing of the manifold wisdom of God to all principalities and authorities in the heavenlies. What Paul is saying is the church, we the church, the gathering, the people that gather and call themselves Jesus followers that come together, we are the banner of victory to the enemy of God. To the world, we are the banner of victory. This is what the church is. I want you to think about that, whether you're talking about a small local church or you're talking about a mega church. This is the calling and the invitation of the church to be the banner of victory of Jesus to the world. This has a major implication for us because this now changes, once again, who we see ourselves to be, not as an individual, but as a collective, that we are the victory of Jesus. It changes how we interact with each other. It changes how we see each other, that we must be rooted in a God who is good and is loving. And it must be rooted then in our own image of Him. We each bring our own purpose to this gathering. And as we gather, we then are the banner of victory of Jesus to the world. So this is what we want to unpack with Andrew and Jill about what it actually means to have a communal identity and how do we actually live that out every day. Okay, so this is our third part where we're going to talk about who are we then as a collective. So what do you see as a communal identity? Like, what is it, so to speak?
Yeah, I'll kick us off here with this. I think the aspect of let us create mankind or humanity in our image. So straight away there you've got this like pluralism in the divinity. Right. So the pluralism of divinity is obviously then expressed in the plurality of humanity. And that speaks to difference because we know that the plurality of divinity is Father, Spirit, Son. And so you have three different elements within identity, and those are so important, and they're also in community. So community does not mean uniformity, but it does mean unity. It means difference, but it means togetherness. It means roles and functions that are held and bound together to achieve their outcome and to work well. So I think that's our starting point for then who are we. Right. Well, then if we're in God's image and God is plural and with different forms, then we too should expect to be different, but yet also expect and pursue unity in our carrying out of our lives here.
Yeah, so different but unified. This is something that you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah, it just doesn't look like the same, isn't it? But I love that idea though of your identity's found so much in your purpose. So if the model is Trinity, if the model is the perfect way this looks, or three beings with one purpose, what's the purpose? It was to love. It was to love other, right? It was to, and it looks different for sure, but the purpose, the common goal is the same. And I think that's where relationships are really, really strong. When you know where you're going and you know what the goal is, it can look different, but there's a common purpose. And I think that's the strength of community when we know what we're called to.
Right.
So
yeah, I think there's an aspect of being made in His image that we carry, that it's important that I show up with who God's made me to be. you show up who God's made you to be. I am not above you. You're not above me. My gifting, calling, how I am showing up is not better than or greater than. And then that doesn't mean that anybody's less than.
Right.
There's a beautiful equality to being in community. So difference doesn't mean disagreement, or it doesn't mean division. Sorry, it can mean disagreement, but you don't divide. You even look at how Jesus shows up with his disciples, who are vastly different. But we also know now the truth that they too are made in the image of God. So you've got like this group of Jesus followers who. One's, Matthew the tax collector, so he's the collaborator with the enemy. He is a traitor to his people. He is no longer considered Jewish because he's left his nation behind, because he's jumped in with the Romans, so he's hated. And then you've got Simon the zealot, who couldn't be any more nationalistic and Jewish, so much so he's fighting against the very people that Matthew's working for. So you've got this like divergent group of people who are, you've got brothers who are fighting and arguing about who's going to be the most important in the kingdom. You've got all of this range of people who are following after Jesus, and yet Jesus models the image of God in each of them, seeing the good, believing in them, saying that they can follow me because I believe in you, that you can. He journeys with them, and they're shaped and formed in his image as they journey. So who are we as community? We are no greater or less than anyone in our community that follows after Jesus. Right. We are all on a journey with him to be shaped and formed like him. Who we are is not who we will be. And I think that posture towards one another is really helpful as we work out our identity and community as followers of Jesus.
I was looking there because I wanted to make sure the wording of this because I love what you're saying about difference. I love what you're saying about everybody finding their purpose. It's sometimes easier said than done. So I'm sure that inner circle of 12, those disciples, that must have been a chaotic. I think you said earlier they were grumbling amongst themselves. The binding is Jesus. That's what brings us all. Him at the center is brilliant. But what have you seen that prevents us embracing like a community identity, right? Like what could be barriers to that for us as a church, or just any gathering of people?
I think it's whenever, so if you think of the progression of this as being who God is, who we are, and all of us will have a unique gifting and a unique calling. And when you bring that into a wide group of people, and everyone has an individual purpose and an individual calling and unique gifting, all needed in the room, is it the thing that then people go, well, mine's the most important? Like, there's just
Right.
this something so broken where you want to go, well, this is obviously the most
So
important
then the
thing.
hierarchy does happen as you're...
And it shouldn't, which is
Right.
why we consistently need to be realigned, corrected, reminding ourselves, well, what's the purpose of this? So I think we said this before, is it just that we are right? Is it that I bring my stuff and I'm doing it well and this is right?
Right.
And it's the holy activity, but actually we've lost, like pretty much back to what my experience was. I know all about, but I don't know. If I'm to experience love, am I going to do that when I'm lording it over people or trying to push my agenda, right? And if I start to see people and value what you bring to the room, it's valuing others. It's like that body ministry.
So you
that
never
Paul
allow
talks about.
yourself to become above or even essentially below
Yeah.
others. Well, actually, Jesus almost embodies saying, get below each other.
Yeah, that's what he's saying, and he's actually gives more weight to the lesser, right?
Right.
Which is it's upside down kingdom.
It's a fight to the bottom,
Right.
not a fight to the top.
Right.
But not a fight to the bottom in like a
As a pushing
denigrating.
down, yeah.
It's like in a how can my gift, how can my image of God that I particularly carry, how can I actually elevate? We see the elevation that Jesus brings to others. Where he calls Zacchaeus son of Abraham. He restores his identity as a Jewish. He calls
He restores his communal identity.
He restores him into community so much. Many, in fact, well, fact check me on this, but most of Jesus' miracles and healings are actually to restore the community, to bring people back in who have been isolated, because isolation and self and the directions, like, hey, let's be honest, Zacchaeus was isolated because he chose to be isolated and he chose his self path. So he started to form his own identity, and that was based around greed and selfishness, and that will always lead us away from the identity that we are made in. And so Jesus actually does the business then of restoring his identity. And then look, the transformation as he goes from knowing about God to literally knowing God himself. He's like, oh, I now am going to be generous. Well, why is he going to be generous? Because that's who his creator is. Yeah. And so he now is reflecting his image. And then the people are now seeing that as well. And so when we fully embody and carry out our purpose and understand the image of God within us, actually that is seen and experienced by others. And what does it bring? It brings flourishing and it brings goodness.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's actually our culture and our world that has this a bit upside down for us.
Right.
Because actually, if the kingdom model is honor all, love all, value all, we don't see that in culture. And we grew up in a world where we do place higher value on certain people, with certain jobs or certain whatever, or they look a certain way. Do you know what I mean? There is a value system in our world, but that's not the way of the kingdom. And so that's an absolute clash. And I think that's at times maybe why church community identity has struggled, because are we falling into
it's modeled on the wrong
it's
model.
Modeled on the wrong model, and we start to think then that, and you see this all the time, that it's the people in the important jobs who gets to decide what's important, because actually all of it is, absolutely all of it is, all of it is honourable, and it's where you then see, you know, people start to become a little bit insecure. Well, maybe my part's not that great because that's not the bit that everybody seems to love, or so it's a total reorientation, a realignment with the value of the kingdom, knowing that we have been raised in a world that has a completely different value culture.
Right. Like, because the danger here, guys, you know, as we do this is what's seen, but what you don't see is the person on the other side of this, who without them, this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Right.
But you'll not know who that is. But we know who he is. He's just spent nearly 2 hours doing cables and lights and all sorts. But that's really, really important. But nobody sees that.
So
but that
true.
doesn't mean that that's not important.
Right.
Because without that, this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then there's this beautiful, we get the opportunity to bear the image, to acknowledge the gifting, the image of others, and not just look at ourselves.
Yeah. And shout out to James Bamber there as well.
Come on, James.
I thank you for bringing up culture, because that is where we want to now go for
It's
our
almost
next
like
video.
I knew that's where you wanted to go, right?
You're just trained for this. That's where we want to go now. We want to go in our next video and just look at where are we and how can we engage in that. So thank you guys.